Every now and then, I like to pull out the good old PlayStation 2 and dust off some classic video games for a good nostalgia trip. This time around, I landed on that title that I feel doesn't get talked about nearly enough. 007 Agent Under Fire. It's the Bond game that, in my opinion, gets overshadowed by its more popular successors. So I decided to give it another shot and see how well it holds up today.
You've come a very long way to die, Mr. Bond.
I remember playing this game a ton on the Nintendo GameCube at my cousin's house growing up. Eventually, I did get my own copy on the PS2, but by that point, I also picked up Nightfire alongside it. And honestly, I just ended up playing Nightfire way more over time. So admittedly, I never actually finished Agent Under Fire, not until I decided to review it for this video. While doing some research for this review, it was really cool finding out that Agent Under Fire was the first Bond game to feature a fully original story not tied to any movie. Only a handful of games ever did that, like Nightfire, Everything or Nothing, and Bloodstone. So in a way, this game set the foundation for those later titles. Now, while a couple of older Bond titles technically had original plots like James Bond: The Duel on the Sega Genesis, Agent Under Fire was the first major console Bond game to deliver a full cinematic story that wasn't tied to any film.
Go to hell.
You first. Enjoy the ride.
Agent Under Fire was released in November 2001 on the PlayStation 2 by EA Games. It was then later released in March 2002 on the Xbox and Nintendo GameCube. Interestingly enough, it was originally meant to be an adaptation of The World Is Not Enough for the PS2. EA had already released versions of The World Is Not Enough on the Nintendo 64 and PS1, and the plan was to bring it to PlayStation 2 as well. But during development, the PS2 version started to take on a life of its own, eventually moving away from the movie's plot entirely. So the team scrapped the movie tie-in and decided to go with a fully original Bond story instead. That shift is what ultimately led to the creation of 007 Agent Under Fire. When you first boot up the game, you're greeted with an opening cinematic that gives you a preview of what you're about to dive into. It features that iconic Bond theme to get your blood pumping and sets the tone for the next 5 to 6 hour action-packed thrill ride. Just before starting a mission, the game tells you how many Bond points you need to earn a gold medal. Getting that gold medal unlocks a reward, usually something like a new weapon, gadget, or cheat that you can use when replaying that mission. You earn Bond points based on how well you complete each mission. Things like how many enemies you took out, your accuracy, how fast you finished, and whether you pulled off any Bond-style moves all factor into your score. At the end of each mission, the game breaks down your performance and shows you where you did well and where you might need to improve if you want that gold medal on your next run. Once you select a mission, you're debriefed by M, voiced by Karen Pascoe, hope I'm pronouncing that name right, who does a phenomenal job channeling Judi Dench's version of that character. She lays out the mission details, explains the objective, the threat, and what's at stake. Occasionally, Q or R will chime in at the end to brief you on any new gadgets you'll be equipped with for the mission ahead. It's funny, like most people, I was always familiar with Q. Granted, I never watched all of the James Bond movies, but this iconic character from the Bond films who supplies 007 with all of his gadgets, I never really knew about R until playing this game. After doing a bit of research, I found out that R is actually from the Brosnan era movies. He was introduced in The World Is Not Enough as Q's assistant and eventual replacement. Bond jokingly nicknames him R, and in the next film, he actually ends up taking over Q Branch. It's a nice little nod to the Bond film timeline that fans of the series will definitely appreciate. Bond in this game is voiced by Andrew Bicknell, who has also provided the character's look and motion capture. He's not officially modeled after any specific actor, but you can definitely feel the Pierce Brosnan influence with the slick tux, smooth delivery, and high-tech gadgets. It's got that late 90s, early 2000s Bond aura all over it. That being said, after doing some research, I noticed that there might be a bit of Roger Moore influence in there as well. I never watched any of the Moore era Bond films myself, but from what I've read, his version of Bond leaned more into the playful, over-the-top side of things. And honestly, with all the cheesy one-liners and ridiculous gadgets in the game, I can kind of see it. So in a way, this Bond feels like it takes the best attributes from both.
Smashing entrance, wouldn't you say?
Now, the story is about Bond stopping this shady organization called Malprave Industries, a biotech corporation developing cloning technology. As you progress through the game's plot, there are a few twists and turns, and you eventually discover that the tech is being used to replace world leaders with clones so that way they can control everything. The story's pretty straightforward, and honestly, it's what you'd expect from any classic James Bond setup. I really didn't have an issue with it, but to be honest, I'm not here for the plot. I'm here to kill bad guys, drive fast cars, blow stuff up, and be a badass Brit all while doing it. Now, the biggest issue I ran into immediately was the way the controls were set up. Holy hell, this did not feel good at all. I'm sure back in the day this layout wasn't too out of the ordinary, but after playing so many modern first-person shooters, going back to this setup was just awful. Thankfully, you can change the controls, but not mid-mission. You have to quit out, go into the settings, and manually pick your preferred control scheme, which for me and probably most people today is the third one. Why it isn't default, I'll never know, and the BS part of it all, when you reload the game later, it resets back to the default scheme, so you have to go through this process again. You can miss me with that. Now, one of the cooler aspects of the game is how it rewards you essentially for thinking like James Bond. Each mission has hidden secrets and what is called Bond moves. Bond moves are stylish actions like using a gadget to bypass a locked door, taking out enemies with environmental traps, or finding alternative routes throughout the level. Some missions even have bonus objectives or hidden gadgets tucked away off the main path. These secrets not only boost your Bond points, but also add some solid replay value, encouraging you to explore and be a bit more creative with how you approach each mission. One issue I found though with the whole Bond move system is that every time you pull one off, the game plays a snippet of the Bond theme, and at first it's kind of cool. It makes you feel like you did something awesome, but after a while, especially if you're planning on beating the game in one sitting, it starts to get really repetitive. That little music sting goes from being hyped to borderline annoying after a few hours. Aiming can be a bit tough to manage at times, especially with the older controls setup. It feels like whenever I'm trying to make a small adjustment, just a little nudge of the thumbstick, the reticle jerks way too far. There were plenty of moments where I felt like I was fighting the controls more than the enemies. That being said, the game does give you some auto aim assist. During combat, the reticle will snap to enemies to help you land shots, which definitely makes things more manageable. You can also press L1 to manually lock onto targets, and that especially comes in handy when using the sniper rifle. Some weapons in the game have alternate functions that can be activated by pressing the square button. For example, the standard pistol can be fitted with a silencer for stealthier takedowns, while the Windsor FSU assault rifle lets you switch to its attached grenade launcher. Perfect for clearing out groups of enemies. The weapon variety in Agent Under Fire is pretty solid for what you're given throughout the playthrough. Like I mentioned earlier, you've got the pistol, which can be silenced for stealth, SMGs for more up-close action, and one of my personal favorites, the Windsor FSU as mentioned earlier, with its attached grenade launcher, which is super satisfying to use against groups of enemies. The shotgun is also a blast, literally, with the kind of explosive impact that just never gets old. And then there's the game's version of the AK-47 known as the KA-57, which shows up in the rail shooter style missions. Those sections ended up being one of my most memorable moments revisiting this title. One of the biggest things that separates Bond games from your average first-person shooters is the inclusion of gadgets. The one you'll be using the most is the Q laser, which lets you cut through locks to access shortcuts, vents, and even hidden crates that contain extra weapons. You'll also be using the Q claw pretty frequently as well. It helps you reach high up ledges and navigate through certain levels in more creative ways. These tools really give the game that signature spy feel and makes you think a little differently than just point and shoot. Now, you can't have a 007 game without some car chases, and Agent Under Fire delivers. Early on, you get behind the wheel of the BMW Z8. It's fully decked out with machine guns, rockets, an EMP device, and even a speed boost to spice things up. The controls feel tight and very responsive. I never had any issues with these levels and honestly had a blast every time one came up. Later in the game, you are given the privilege to drive the iconic Aston Martin DB5. It comes with most of the same gadgets as the BMW, but this mission featuring the DB5 really nails that classic Bond vibe. It's full of cool set pieces and cinematic moments that leave a lasting impression. One of those levels you'll look back on fondly after finishing the game. For a game that came out in 2001, the graphics really aren't bad at all. The environments and settings look solid and definitely give off that classic 007 vibe. The voice acting is on point across the board, and of course, you got the iconic Bond theme kicking in, even if you do end up hearing it like every 5 seconds. Now, I did not end up playing the multiplayer aspect of the game, but it does mention at some point about there being escort missions that you can play through, which I am most certainly not going to participate in because escort missions can eat my whole ass. All in all, Agent Under Fire might be a short game with only 12 missions, but it delivers a classic 007 adventure that I think any true Bond fan can appreciate. Streets of Bucharest stand out as one of the most memorable missions for me. It really captures that cinematic Bond energy. I also really enjoyed the stealth-focused mission, Bad Diplomacy, where you have to sneak through undetected using a dart gun. That one stuck with me too, and it's these little moments that make the game worth revisiting, even after all these years. 24 years later. Guys, my name is Pedro Ordonez, also known as GameLight7. Please subscribe, comment, like, thumbs up, do whatever you guys can to support this channel. Let me know which 007 game was your favorite growing up in the comment section down below, and I will see you guys next time in my next video. Peace out.
In the meantime, you can enjoy the view.
I already am.